Hello everyone and welcome back to Now Politics. So in my last video which went over election predictions for the 2024 presidential election between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, I said that for our next video we'll be going over election predictions for the 2023 to 2024 gubernatorial elections, which we'll be doing today. So there will be 14 states who will be electing their governors between 2023 and 2024. And as always, I will characterize each of these states as voting either as safe, likely, lean, or tilt towards either the Democrats or the Republicans. Three of these states, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Kentucky, will be electing their governors in November of 2023, while the rest 11 will be electing their governors in 2024. So we'll begin with the safe states, which again I'll characterize as delivering a margin of victory of over 15 percentage points to the victor. And I'll start with the safe Republican states. So for the Republicans, I will give by safe margins Utah, North Dakota, Missouri, Indiana, West Virginia, as well as Montana, Vermont, and New Hampshire. So now, the incumbent governors in Montana, Vermont, and New Hampshire who are eligible to run have still not announced whether they will be running for governor in their respective states. They are all incredibly popular in their respective states, and if they do run for governor, they should win easily. However, we still don't know whether they will officially run. So I'll be essentially characterizing these three particular states, Montana, Vermont, and New Hampshire, as conditionally safe Republican. Safe Republican on the condition that the governors in these states, Greg Gianforte in Montana, Phil Scott in Vermont, and Chris Sununu in New Hampshire, decide to run once again for governor. So those are all for my safe Republican states. Now we'll be going over the safe Democratic states, and for that I only have two, the states of Washington and Delaware. So that should be no surprise. These are incredibly reliable Democratic states. So that's all for my safe states. Now we'll be going over to the likely states, which again I'll characterize as delivering a margin of victory of between 5 and 15 percentage points to the victor. And I'll start with the likely Republican states. So the first likely Republican state I will be giving is the state of Louisiana. So Louisiana does have a Democratic incumbent governor, John Bel Edwards. However, he is term limited and will not be able to run in November of 2023. So let's look at the candidates in the race right now, and we actually have a bunch of them. So on the Democratic side, we have two candidates, Danny Cole, a pastor who's not really that serious of a candidate, but the second one is Sean Wilson, who is a former secretary of the Louisiana Department of Transportation and Development. On the Republican side, we actually have a bunch of lead candidates. However, the one who is leading among them is Jeff Landry, who is the Attorney General of the state of Louisiana. So, Louisiana essentially has this jungle primary system. So instead of having a Republican primary in which all of the Republicans choose the Republican nominee for governor, and all have a Democratic primary in which all of the Democratic voters choose a Democratic nominee for governor. They essentially have this jungle primary in which all of the voters essentially go and choose their preferred candidate, and then the top two performers in the primary will essentially advance to the general election. So based on the polls we're seeing, it will be most probable that Sean Wilson on the Democratic side and Jeff Landry on the Republican side will advance to the general election after the jungle primary. So let's look at some of the polls from Louisiana. So we could see that in the beginning, when polls were just starting to happen for the race, Landry was doing pretty well in the first poll for the governor's race held on June 15th. Landry was winning against Wilson by 10 percentage points, and much of these polls included all of the candidates. It wasn't just Landry and Wilson. In the second poll, Landry was winning by 18 percentage points. However, this is a Republican poll. But the third poll is when things start to get a bit worse for Landry. In the third poll, which is again sponsored by a Republican group, Wilson was now leading by 2 percentage points. Landry was able to stabilize his lead again by winning by 8 percentage points in another poll after. Hold on to a second. And then in the poll after, which was sponsored by a Republican group, Landry's lead now dropped from 8 to 2 percentage points. It's pretty surprising to see how Landry could get a margin victory of 8 percentage points in a nonpartisan poll and then have that lead drop to 2 percentage points in a Republican sponsored poll. And then there's the another poll, which is the latest poll, held just between Landry and Wilson, and in that Landry wins by 5 percentage points. So yes, the lead, Landry's lead has been dropping. However, I still think he will manage to essentially win the general election, by a comfortable margin, which is exactly why I placed Louisiana as likely Republican. Let's look at this poll for a minute. The latest poll in which all of the candidates were included. So Landry wins by 2 percentage points, getting 30% of the vote, and Wilson gets 28% of the vote. So let's say this is how the jungle primary looks like. So now 58% of the electorate, 28% coming from Wilson's side and 30% coming from Landry's side, will be seeing their preferred candidate advance to the general election. However, and I believe all of these other candidates are on the Republican side, aside from that 58%, there will be 42% of the electorate consisting of Republican voters who did not see their preferred Republican candidates essentially advance to the general election, because I believe all of these candidates are on the Republican side aside from Wilson and Landry. So 42% won't see their candidate advance to the general, and a lot of them may be disinterested to actually go to the general election in November. It's not like 2023 is that big of a year politically speaking. It's not really a federal election year. But as a Republican, let's say Landry is able to actually get a little less than half of that 42% to come on to his side. He's able to unify the Republican base more. So of that 42% group of voters, who won't see their candidate win, let's say 20% come to Landry's side because Landry is a Republican, and the other 22% decide to stay home. So Landry will be able to essentially get 20% of the electorate from this particular group of Republican voters I'm talking about, as well as have 30% of the electorate from his base. He could have 50% of the electorate on his side, while Wilson only has 28 to say 30% of the electorate to his side. So let's say Wilson is able to expand his lead to 30% of the electorate. He has that support from the electorate, and Landry has 50% of the electorate. So in the general election, 80% of the electorate will go attend, 50% coming from Landry's side, 30% coming from Wilson's side, and in such general election, Landry will be able to win with 62.5% of the vote. This is a safe margin of victory. So if Landry is just able to hold on to his base, based on the poll in which he is leading by the lowest margin, get a little less than half just a little less than half of Republican voters who don't see their candidate uh, advance to the general election. And assuming Wilson is even able to expand his lead, say, to 30%, Landry can still win by a safe margin. So that's why the optics look so good for Republicans in Louisiana. And considering all the polarization we have been seeing across the country and the fact that Louisiana is, a pretty conservative state, it will be pretty easy for Landry to essentially bank on to this group of Republican voters who don't see their candidate advance to the general election after the jungle primary. Uh, I'm going to predict it's going to be very easy for him to bank on to that group of voters, and if he has at least some voters from that group and keep on to his own base, he can win by a safe margin. And polarization is just going to be make it it's just going to make it more easier for him to essentially bank on to as many Republican voters as he can. It's not like John Bell Edwards can be, that big of a sway on the Democratic side. I mean, if you look at his approval ratings, he has a 51% approval rating, 41% disapproval rating. So he's not extremely unpopular, but he's also not extremely popular of a governor to be that big of a sway. So Landry can easily win this by a safe margin. However, I'll still be rating Louisiana as likely Republican because we're still not quite certain as to how much of this special group of Republican voters who don't see their preferred candidate advance to the general election, are swayed towards Landry. I want to wait after the jungle primary and see a lot more polls between Landry and Wilson to essentially show me how much these particular group of Republican voters uh, get swayed towards Landry. If a lot of those voters are swayed towards Landry, then Landry should be winning by pretty wide margins in those polls after the primary. If, a good chunk do, but like not most or all of them, then Landry should be leading, say, by a narrower but comfortable margin in those polls. And if a lot of those Republican voters really don't move to Landry, then those polls after the primary should look really, really narrow. However, my bet is at least a good chunk of those, Republican voters, even if it's not most or all of them, mainly because of polarization occurring throughout the country, which is why I really think Louisiana should vote for Landry by at least a likely margin. But because I'm not quite certain of the dynamics in the state yet, which I will be more so after I see a lot more polls after the jungle primary, I will be cautious enough not to rate Louisiana as safe Republican. So that's my first likely Republican state, and my second likely Republican state will be Mississippi. So, Mississippi, in my opinion, is going to be the most interesting race of this election season. So, Tate Reeves, who um, is the incumbent governor of Mississippi, will be running for a second term. He should easily win the Republican primary, as polls are suggesting. However, his main opponent, who's going to be a real challenge to him, is Brandon Presley. Brandon Presley is a member of the Mississippi Public Service Commission. So now Tate Reeves is an extremely unpopular governor in the state of Mississippi. Under his administration, the state experienced a massive water crisis go on in the Jackson, Mississippi area. I mean, it happened in the summer of 2022. 160,000 people, along with a lot of hospitals, fire stations, schools, were essentially left without safe drinking water, mainly because of a flood which happened around the Pearl River in Mississippi. So this water crisis really cost him a lot in his approval ratings. At the same time, the state has been experiencing a severe hospital crisis. Hospitals in the state are apparently unable to operate due to, a high cost of goods and supplies, higher staffing costs, as well as a lot of shortage in their staff. And a lot of people are essentially saying that this is because of the state's decision to forego Medicaid funds. So you have a water crisis in the state, you have hospitals unable to operate and take care of patients, and the cherry on the top is that there's also been a welfare scandal in the state in which Reeves has been accused of siphoning welfare funds for his own special interests. So now, Presley has spared zero opportunities to slam and attack Reeves for all of these problems occurring in the state. Now, Presley, he is pretty conservative on gun issues as well as abortions, which make him pretty connectable towards conservatives and right leaning independents. And at the same time, he has a lot of signature policies, such as expanding Medicaid in the state and eliminating the grocery tax, which has been seen as pretty popular policies in the state, which you could see according to this poll conducted on April of 2023. 58% of voters would vote for a candidate who would support eliminating the grocery tax, and another 55% of voters would vote for a candidate that supports expanding Medicaid in Mississippi. And expanding Medicaid in a pretty red conservative state really shows how messed up the healthcare system has become in Mississippi. So already you have one candidate, the incumbent governor, who's presided over all of these problems I've been talking about in Mississippi, and another candidate who's pretty conservative on some issues, that being guns and abortions, and as a result could attract a lot of conservatives, and who has a lot of popular, policies in his pocket. So there's not really a lot of ground for Reeves to attack Presley with while there's a lot of ground for Presley to attack Reeves with, which he has been doing consistently throughout his campaign. So the dynamics of this election is already being set up with Presley on the clear offensive position and Reeves on the clear defensive position in a pretty reliably red state. That's not looking good for Reeves in any way whatsoever. But this isn't even where things really start to get bad for Tate Reeves. If you look at another poll conducted by the same institute which conducted this poll, the Siena College Research Institute, the poll essentially goes over the favorability of the different candidates. You'll see that 20% of Republicans in the state are willing to support Brandon Presley. They view him favorably. 20% of the Republican voters, according to this poll. Now, if you think about the partisan split in Mississippi, it's mainly 40% for the Democrats and 60% for the Republicans. And that's being pretty charitable towards the Republicans, considering how they've been doing in other statewide elections in the state of Mississippi. So 40% of the electorate will be Democratic. And when the general election comes, this 40% will most probably vote for Brandon Presley. Because if you're a Democrat in Mississippi and you don't really like Tate Reeves, as I don't think any Democrat would in Mississippi, you're probably going to vote for any Democrat on the ballot against Tate Reeves, who will be most probably Brandon Presley. So Presley is already going to have 40% support. Now, if Presley is able to get 20% of the Republicans in the state, he'll get 20% of the 60% of the electorate consisting of Republicans, which is equal to 12% of the electorate, plus the given 40% he has. In that case, Presley could get 52% of the vote and defeat Tate Reeves by a lean margin of 4 percentage points if 20% of the Republicans choose to move to Presley. But despite all of these developments, there is one factor, one really big factor in this race, this election, for which reason I'm not characterizing Mississippi as Democratic, but rather likely Republican. And that has to do with the name recognition of Brandon Presley. When this poll asks about the favorability of Tate Reeves, only 12% say that they don't know him enough to say. But when the poll asks about the favorability of Brandon Presley, 64% of people don't know him. They just don't know who he is. He has no name recognition among about 2/3 of the people taking this poll. 2/3 of people who are going to vote, most probably, in the Mississippi general election for governor. So, because of this name recognition problem Presley has, he's not going to be known by enough people to actually have enough of the support he needs, let alone 20% support among Republicans, which he needs in order to win. All of the factors I've been talking about in this race, which help Presley, the problems created under Tate Reeves, which Presley has attacked, Presley's conservative stances towards guns and abortions, Presley's policies such as eliminating the grocery tax and expanding Medicaid. They create a great platform for him. But a great platform is worthless for him if he doesn't have enough name recognition. Now, of course, the vast majority of the electorate in states like Mississippi, as well as other deep South states, consist of, rural conservative voters. Now, a lot of those voters may like Presley if they know who Presley is and what Presley is campaigning on. But there's just not going to be enough name recognition for Presley at this rate among these voters come the general election, which is why a lot of these voters, at least enough to build a majority, are just going to vote by default for Tate Reeves. In a statewide election in a deep red state like Mississippi, the Democrat is always going to have to work far, far more harder than the Republican will. And they have to make sure that everything is going right for them. That doesn't just mean making sure that they have a strong platform, that also means making sure that they have strong name recognition. If Presley's name recognition is this low in Mississippi, he's not going to win the general election by any means. So now, this is one gigantic flaw of Presley's, which essentially offsets everything else I said, which would help Presley theoretically in the election. Now, in addition to this one gigantic factor, which will ultimately hurt Presley, eventually lead him to lose the election, as I predict, and help Reeves, there's also another factor which is going to help Reeves, and that's the fact that Reeves has been capitalizing on the hot issues in the country. And he did that this year early on by signing a bill which essentially bans gender affirming care for minors into law in Mississippi. So, if you don't know what gender affirming care is, it's essentially this physical procedure or a physical tool, I would say, that transgenders use to essentially help them change their gender, physically speaking. Transgenders are of course people who have decided that they want to switch their genders. So now, gender affirming care has been something that Democrats have been significantly advocating for, and something that Republicans have been significantly advocating against. And issues like these, through the entrenched polarization and partisanship we have been seeing throughout the country, essentially create a lot of divisiveness and help Democrats to be more Democratic and Republicans to be more Republican. Now, Presley has not supported this bill, at least not explicitly saying that, matters such as gender affirming care should be handled by parents and families, and that is something that Reeves has essentially attacked him on during his campaign. So I really have to give credit to Reeves here for doing something which is going to keep his Republican base more energized and more loyal to him, while also giving him more ground to attack Presley, which again I said he was, quite struggling with early on in his campaign. So this law is definitely going to come in handy for him to essentially increase his popularity come the general election. And through these two factors, low name recognition for Presley as well as entrenched polarization, which Reeves is essentially capitalizing on through this law, it will ultimately help Reeves to win. And in a state like Mississippi, I think he can win easily by a likely margin. And in the end, the polls are indicating that if you go to the gubernatorial polls for Mississippi, Reeves is winning in all but one. Presley only wins by a 4% lean margin in one poll, which is sponsored by Democrats, while Reeves is able to win in all of the nonpartisan polls, winning by 4 percentage points in one poll early on, then 7 percentage points, then 11 percentage points, and is able to win by 3 percentage points in a poll sponsored by Brandon Presley's campaign itself. So, the optics may look good for Presley, but in the end, his name recognition is not there. Polarization is going to help Republicans in conservative states like Louisiana and like Mississippi, and this is all going to lead to Tate Reeves winning by what I would predict a likely margin, and the polls indicate that as well. So that's all for my likely Republican states. I don't have any likely Democratic states, so now I'm going to move on to the lean states, which I'll characterize as delivering a margin of victory of between 1 and 5 percentage points, and I'll start with the lean Republican states. So now the first and only state I'll be characterizing as lean Republican is the state of North Carolina. So North Carolina does have an incumbent Democratic governor by the name of Roy Cooper. He is a two-term governor, so he will be term limited and will not be able to run in 2024. So let's focus on the candidates in this election. On the Democratic side, we only see one person who has declared himself as a candidate, and that is Josh Stein, who is the Attorney General of North Carolina. On the Republican side, we have three people who have declared themselves as candidates, but the one who seems to be most aimed to win the Republican nomination is Mark Robinson, the current Lieutenant Governor of North Carolina. So now, North Carolina's election for governor will be held in simultaneously with the presidential election, 2024 presidential election, which will make polarization even more higher than for the other three states, which I said will be holding their elections in 2023: Louisiana, Mississippi, and Kentucky. So now, if you look at the approval ratings of, Mark Robinson against Josh Stein, it's not really that bad, to be honest with you. So he has a 45% approval rating in a recent poll, while Stein has 44%, 1% less. So, Robinson, he has been able to build, a lot of good standing and influence statewide in North Carolina as the lieutenant governor. And, for a center-right state which has had, a Democratic governorship for the last, right now, 7 years, there's a lot of energy for there to now be a Republican governor in 2024. Robinson can use the standing and influence he has gained to help himself win through the general election, and Republicans will be even more benefited in 2024 because of the high amount of polarization occurring throughout the nation, especially in 2024, as that is when the presidential election will be held. Now, if you look at a lot of the polls here, Robinson, he is in general favored. Stein is only winning in two polls, both of which are surprisingly Republican sponsored polls. However, Robinson had also won in two Democratic sponsored polls. He has won one, two, three, four, five polls in total, while Stein just won two. And in the latest poll, Robinson is winning against Stein by 3 percentage points. Now, I will be more charitable to the Democrats for this race by labeling North Carolina as a lean Republican state instead of, say, a likely Republican state, given that Democrats are building impressive progressive coalitions in the state. Those coalitions have not matured and are not capable of, handing serious blows towards Republicans statewide, but they are, growing and emerging across the state. And, you know, Stein, he is also a statewide official. So he also has some, statewide influence and standing on his own as well. And a lot of these polls are also indicating a lean margin race. Consistently, there's only one poll in which Stein is winning by 6 percentage points, in which the margin of victory is over a lean margin. However, in the rest, they're all lean margins. So, for all these reasons, I'll be characterizing North Carolina as lean Republican. So now I'll be going over my one lean Democratic state, which will be the last state we'll be going over today, which of course is the state of Kentucky. So Kentucky is another traditional Republican state, along with the states of Louisiana and North Carolina, which have Democratic incumbent governors. So Andy Beshear is the incumbent governor of the state of Kentucky. He will be running again for another term as governor, and his challenger on the Republican side will be Daniel Cameron, who is the Attorney General of the state of Kentucky. So the primary elections for this gubernatorial election have already been held, and these two candidates will be facing off each other. So, yes, Kentucky is a pretty staunch Republican state. However, this is the one conservative state where the Democrats will have the best chances of winning because they have a Democratic incumbency which they can use to their advantage, as the Democratic incumbent will be running again. And not only is this a Democratic incumbent governor, but he has fared pretty well in his state. Andy Beshear is a pretty popular governor in the state of Kentucky. He is, in fact, the fifth most popular governor in the United States, with a 63% approval rating as of April 2023. That's about two-thirds of constituents in Kentucky. So, of course, there's a lot of factors which led to this significant popularity of his. He's handled the economy very well with a lot of manufacturing coming to the state. He's tackled other issues such as healthcare, floods, tornadoes, as well as education even. And his constituents in Kentucky, they view his actions quite favorably for a pretty deep red state. That's pretty good for a Democrat like Andy Beshear. And if you look at the polls, he's not doing that bad either. For the gubernatorial polls in Kentucky, Beshear has not lost a single poll against any uh, Republican when he is competing against Republicans who aren't Daniel Cameron. He's doing exceptionally well. However, Daniel Cameron is the Republican nominee for this election, and in the polls between Bashar and Cameron, the margins of victory get a bit more narrower. In the first poll between Bashar and Cameron for the season, Bashar is able to win by 9 percentage points. In the second such poll, his lead drops all the way to 2 percentage points. However, this poll is sponsored by the Daniel Cameron campaign, so the fact that Bashar is, still leading in such a poll is quite indicative that he's doing pretty well. Bashar shows his worst performance, however, in the latest poll, in which he and Cameron tie at 47%. So, Daniel Cameron, he is a pretty decent candidate. And will polarization and partisanship occurring throughout the nation help Republicans in Kentucky, a pretty conservative state? Of course it will. But may I remind you, the polarization which will happen in 2023 will not be as high as the polarization which will occur in 2024 when the presidential election is held. So, I think Bashar's strong showing throughout his gubernatorial uh, career is going to help him out quite a bit in this election. Will he win by likely or safe margins? I don't think so. I think polarization in general has gone too far for a Democrat to win by such margins in a pretty conservative state. However, I'm quite confident that with everything he has shown for himself and the exceptional popularity he has in the state, I am quite confident that he can win by a lean margin. So, this is my final prediction for the 2023 to 2024 gubernatorial election cycle. The Democrats will win in 3 states, the Republicans will win in 11 states, and flip gubernatorial control in 2 states, those being Louisiana and North Carolina. In the end, Republicans will control 28 governorships throughout the nation, and Democrats will control 22. Thank you everyone for watching my video. Please make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, like the video, and leave a comment because feedback and your opinions are always appreciated on this channel. Thank you everyone and have a nice day.